Hello everyone, this is yours truly, J Blue 68, and today is still Saturday, May the 4th. And I just want to say again, May the 4th be with you. I want to say thank you also to all my subscribers. Please help me to get to that 50 mark. I'm almost there, and from there, I'm looking to get to the 100 mark. And when I get to 100, I said before that I would actually do a prize or giveaway. Once I get to the 100 mark, I'm almost at 50, almost there. Please help me to get there. Thank you, subscribers. I hope you've had a fun day. I hope all of you have had a chance to get to the comic book shop or a local comic book shop and get some free comics. A bunch of cool comics that were being given away today. And I'm just proud and thankful again to be alive to celebrate yet another free comic book day. Well, this is going to be a comic book haul, not dealing with any of my books that I got from today. These are books that I've had for some time. This is part 2 actually of my Star Wars Dark Horse Comics Tales of the Jedi video. That's a mouthful. So we're gonna get right into it. The two books all the books you're gonna see though, I've showed in the previous video that I did for Tales of the Jedi. But I said I would basically break the books down in different parts, probably about 6 different videos, to get more specific into these particular stories and why I feel they're the greatest Star Wars stories ever told in comic book form. I know that Marvel also has published Star Wars comics, and they did a pretty good job on them. Some were actually very good. But the best of the best are the books that are sitting in front of me. And these were printed in the 90s. As I noted in the previous video, I'm going to kind of pan this camera up a little bit so you can see the rest of the book, or the titles on the book. This is Tales of the Jedi, the Freedom Nod Uprising. Freedom Nod, we learn in the comics, was a former Jedi Knight. And that's him actually right there. Almost looks like a cross between Dr. Doom and Darth Vader. But that's Freedom Nod right there. And also note too that the lightsaber blade itself is glowing green instead of red. The red lightsaber for the Sith Lords did not come along until way later on, and that was right around during the time of Sidious, Darth Sidious, Darth Plagueis, and those guys. But we'll get into that, more into that in a moment. Freedom Nod again was a Jedi Knight at one point, and he basically led a revolt against the Jedi Order and how the Force was being used by Force wielders. And let me just explain for those of you who don't know kind of the origins of the Force and Force wielders. The original founders of the Force, or Force wielders, were a fraternity of different beings from across the galaxy, summoned by the power of the Force to gather and learn the ways of its power and how to use it, how to manipulate it, to achieve a higher form of being outside of physical realms and limitations. To study the depths and abilities the Force could provide them as living beings, and eventually use those abilities to serve other people or other beings throughout the galaxy. As time went on, many of those who used the Force sought to use the power to serve other means themselves. And that's where selfishness kind of came into the game. Their sole purpose was to use the Force to rule and subjugate others and use them as servants. That's where the division came between the Jedi Knight, and this is one of the guys who had that mentality, Freedom Nod. And they were, during that time, they weren't really called Dark Lords of the Sith yet. They were called just the Dark Jedi, is what they were considered to be. And there's a reason why they weren't called Dark Lords of the Sith during the time of Freedom Nod, and we'll get to that in a moment. The other thing that's interesting too is that during this particular moment in history, when the Sith Empire was established, the Sith were once just like the Jedi Knights. They were numerous and strong. There were several Sith Lords or Dark Jedi, not just the one or two. But again, I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here. The Force wielders who used the Force to serve others, they were designated. They designated themselves as protectors and keepers of the Force, and were eventually called the Knights of the Force. From there, later they will be called the Knights, later deemed Jedi Knights, or the guardians of all things related to the Force. And of course, we learn in the prequel of the living Force, and then the the unified Force, and then the living Force, or the universal Force, and then the living Force. The schism between how the power was to be used remained a constant debate amongst the Force wielders, which would later cause a split between the fraternity, and inevitably banishment. And he was one of the first guys banished. The banished or vanquished would later create their own fraternity, which would be the Sith Order. The Dark Lords of the Sith even shows how in these comic books it shows how the Sith acquired their name, and it's interesting how that happened, how that came about. Is that the Sith went to or the Dark Lords, I should say, or the Dark Jedi. I'm sorry, not Dark Lords. The Dark Jedi, when they were banished, they went to a sector of the galaxy outside of the known realms, and happened upon a backwater planet called Korriban. And on that planet resided a race of people called the Sith. See, the Sith and a lot of people don't know that. Excuse me. The Sith were actually a race of people, an alien race of Force wielders. The Sith people had the potential to use the Force, but they were not strong in the Force like the Jedi Knights were, or they didn't have the strength to wield the Force like the Jedi Knights did. They basically used the Force for purposes of for telekinetic and telekinesis, to be able to move things with their mind in terms of building structures and to be able to hunt animals for food and that sort of thing. The Dark Jedi used their great manipulation of the Force to subjugate the Sith people into slavery. They used slavery basically to build their empire and force them to build an empire for them, similar to how you could say how the Egyptians ruled over the Israelites in the Bible, just using it as a comparison analogy. They would eventually wipe out the Sith people through their tyrannical rule over them, as any supreme group would do. Similar to how you could say how the Indians were wiped out during the beginning of this particular country. Well, is a similarity in these stories with the Sith people. Very interesting how they use reality, realistic situations in comic books. I've always found that fascinating. One of the reasons why I love comic books. But anyway, the Sith desire to have no challengers or threats to their power or reign. They remain segregated in one part of the galaxy, only conquering the worlds in that particular quadrant. However, the Jedi Order still sense their presence. They sense the presence of the Dark Jedi, and as mentioned, would have their massive planetary meetings. As I mentioned in the previous video, they would have their massive planetary meetings to discuss galactic events on the planet Onderon. That's where the Jedi once resided. They weren't originally from Coruscant. They were on a planet called Onderon. Once they discovered the presence of these dark Force wielders, they decided to confront them and seize their power and control of the Force. Of course, the Sith Lords would not surrender their reign. They would put up a great fight against the Jedi, and these events would culminate into what we call the Great Sith War. And that's what takes place in these comics here. And again, I showed these in my previous video. So I hope that you kind of get the gist of that, what I just explained, is that the Dark Jedi acquired their name by conquering a race of people called the Sith. And they became the Dark Lords of the Sith, or their overlords of the Sith people. And as I just mentioned too, the Jedi Order sensed the Dark Lords, although they remained segregated in a different quadrant of the galaxy. conquering planets and building their empire. The power of the Force is great, or was great, with the Jedi Knights, and they were able to sense that particular threat. And that's where these books come along. The Dark Lords of the Sith, which are the beginnings of the Sith War. And I love that cover. On this cover are two Jedi Knights, Ulic Qel-Droma and Nomi Sunrider, and behind them are the armies of the Old Republic. The Republic Navy and Army gathered together to confront the Dark Lords of the Sith. And here's one of the first Dark Lords of the Sith who actually followed the Frida Nod teachings. And his name is Exar Kun, and that's spelled E-X-A-R. Last name is K-U-N. Exar Kun. So they went to the planet of Korriban to confront him and the other Dark Lords. Okay, and I'll show you some of the other covers here. I showed these before, but I just want to, again, show them again. This is book number 2 of the ongoing war between the Jedi and the newly formed Sith Order. And I mentioned too about them, the Dark Lords of the Sith. The other very interesting thing is the events that take place that surround the revolt amongst the Jedi Order that encouraged changing the way the Jedi operated. Is a rise of the Sith. The events of Dark Lords of the Sith eventually lead into the Sith War, as mentioned previously. Similar to the modern-day original trilogy, there is a family betrayal in the film. Which includes, or in the books, I should say, which includes Jedi Knight Ulic Qel-Droma turning to the dark side of the Force eventually under the influence of Exar Kun. But we'll get into that later. That's in another book. Now, also, the thing that was very interesting about these particular stories is that they did not use the title Darth. The title Darth didn't come along until the time of Palpatine, or Darth Sidious, and Darth Plagueis. And that's when we get into the Rule of Two. You see, during these particular times, the Sith were so evil that they betrayed one another. They fought amongst each other like vicious wolves, just for a seat of power. So the Jedi really didn't have to do much. All they really had to do was a mop-up job, because the Sith were destroying each other. As you can see here, Nomi Sunrider, the Jedi I mentioned earlier, has slaughtered a couple of the followers of the Sith as they're trying to clean up that particular order before they rise to power. But there are many casualties that take place in these stories amongst the Jedi Knights. In this book here, book number 3, I kind of jumped ahead because that's book number 5. Book number 3, that's Jedi Knight Ulic Qel-Droma holding the robes of the now deceased Jedi Master Arca. Jedi Master Arca, as I mentioned in my previous video, trained Ulic Qel-Droma, and during this time, the Jedi Masters were allowed to train they could train 3, 4, 5 Jedi at a time simultaneously. But Master Arca has fallen in battle, and if I recall, he actually is killed by the Dark Lord of the Sith, Exar Kun. And that leads to what I mentioned just a moment ago. This gentleman Jedi here, turning into a Dark Lord of the Sith. That is Ulic Qel-Droma. His plight is very much like Anakin Skywalker's, just a little bit darker, actually. So there's a similarity in these stories and the story arcs altogether. And I just really encourage, anyone who's interested in reading these books to definitely try to find them. They're out of print, unfortunately, but they can probably be found on Amazon or eBay or whatever website that you go to buy your comic books. They're probably still around. Trade paperbacks may still be around. I haven't really been on Amazon lately to find them to see if they are, but they should or could be. But my inspiration for doing these videos is that I just felt, and I still feel, that again, that these are some of the greatest Star Wars books ever written under the helm of Dark Horse Comics. And as I say, this is Dark Horse in their glory days, which was in the 90s. And I'm definitely not saying they're not printing any good books now. But this is when I started getting back into comics again. It wasn't with Marvel or DC, it was with Dark Horse. As I was a big Star Wars fan. I still am, but I'm not liking what they're doing with the new trilogy at all. But again, I'm not here to troll on anything. I'm here to encourage and hopefully influence in the ways of the Force. On this day, May the 4th, I had to do a Star Wars video. And I just want to say my condolences to the family of the late Peter Mayhew. I met him a long time ago. Great guy, nice, very nice guy. I met him at the Dearborn Convention Center back in the early 90s. Very nice guy, like I said. So rest in peace, Mr. Mayhew. And I hope everyone has enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. Tap the bell so you can get more videos like this. I'll be doing at least probably 2 more videos like this, 2 or 3 more videos like this, as it relates to Tales of the Jedi, Star Wars stories. All right, that's it. That's all, y'all. Peace, love, and hair grease.